7:02. Everybody's coming in. It's a packed crowd tonight. We have 150 people who signed up, waiting room only for Beth Felsen tonight. We're so happy to have Beth here with us. Um, I'm going to give everybody one more minute to join. In the meantime, folks who are here, if you could type in the state that you're from and the age of your child, that'd be awesome. I see. Hi, Michael Kilcullen is here, my favorite transition coach. We have a wide variety of people from all over the country. Beth is going to wow us with her knowledge about soft skills for kids with autism and neurodiversity. So I'm excited. While the talk is going on tonight, please type in your comments into the chat room at any point in the conversation. Just throw your questions in there, and I will read them out to Beth at the end. She's going to be answering all of our questions. And it's 7:03, so we're going to start. Welcome, everyone. We are going to be talking tonight with Belth Felsen. She's going to be talking to us about 6 areas of college readiness: building confidence, resilience, and independence. But first, welcome to the Autism College Connection. At the Autism College Connection, our mission is to connect parents, students, and schools with the best information about college and alternatives to college for students with autism and similar issues. Hi, I'm Laura McKenna. I'm the CEO and founder of the Autism College Connection. I have 3 decades of experience in education. I started off as a special education teacher in my early 20s in the South Bronx. Later, I became a college professor with a PhD in education policy. I'm a writer with headlines in the nation's top newspapers and magazines, where I explore many topics, including colleges and autism. I work in my community to support students with disabilities. Not surprisingly, I'm an autism mom, and that's why I'm here. So before we go any further, I have to put a disclaimer onto our talk. That's what my lawyer friends tell me I have to do. So the Autism College Connection, LLC, does not provide legal, accounting, or tax advice. This webinar has been prepared for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied upon for legal, accounting, or tax advice. You should consult your own legal, tax, and accounting advisors before engaging in any transaction. Not that we're really going to be talking about anything about taxes tonight, but you know, it's good to be safe. So, welcome to Beth Felsen. Beth is the founder of Spectrum Transition Coaching, LLC. She provides one-on-one coaching to support autistic young adults working towards higher education, social, organizational, and employment goals. Beth is an autism specialist with a master's in psychology and a graduate certificate in autism from George Mason University. She has over 25 years of experience in the autism community. She is certified as a coach for autistic students. She's an executive function coach, a peer social skills provider, and an active member of the College Autism Network. Beth is going to talk to us today about the 6 soft skills that neurodiverse students should develop, preferably before they go to college, so they can thrive once they get to college. As any parent knows, college is about more than just the academics. We need the whole package to really thrive in college. And Beth is going to tell us about the thriving and the whole package. We're excited to hear what she has to say. Welcome, Beth.
Thank
I am now we're going to do a little clumsy share, switching screens here. Give me a second. I'm going to make Beth the host. I'm going to remove myself, make host, change host, and
Okay.
You are now in charge.
Okay, fantastic. So just share my screen, huh?
Just share your screen.
All right.
And I'm going to even take myself out entirely.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you, everybody. Then thank you, Laura, for that warm welcome. You just, I'm going to have to bypass like 2 slides because you already introduced me, but I promise I'm not talking about taxes, so that's good. And welcome to my talk on the 6 areas of college readiness. Now, if I could just get my slides to move. There we go. Laura had asked that everybody put ages and of their kids, their kiddos, their autistic students, and also the state where they're from. That is really helpful so that I can kind of better target the things that I'm going to tell you. So what are we going to talk about tonight? So we've already done the introductions. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what college readiness is. We use the terminology a lot, but I think it's important to understand what we're really talking about. I'm going to talk about why college readiness is important. We'll get into what I consider to be the 6 top areas of college readiness. And then we'll talk a little bit about, now that you have this information, what can you do with it? And we'll be sure to leave plenty of time for questions. So as Laura mentioned, when you think of a question, just pop it in the chat and we will take care of questions at the end. All right, here's a little bit more about me. Laura was gracious enough to do a little bit of an introduction. On the left-hand side, this is some of the training and certifications that I have. On the right-hand side, you'll see my contact information. And I want to point out that just like Laura, I'm an autism parent myself. I have 3 neurodivergent young adults, all in their 20s. My oldest is my child on the spectrum. And the reason I do this work is because this community needs to learn from fellow parents so that you guys can avoid some of the mistakes that those of us who came before you did not know to avoid. And that's kind of the genesis of why I do what I do. Okay, so let's get to it. What do we mean when we talk about college readiness? There's really 2 parts of capability for college. One is on the left-hand side here, being college capable, being able to do the work, college level work. Usually when we talk about that, we're talking about students who can read and understand and participate in a college level course. But that's only part of what it takes to be successful in college. Being college ready is really all of the other things that students have to be able to manage that intersect with their college capabilities. And that's what helps to produce success at college. So why is there a difference between being capable of college and being ready for college? It really comes down to the differences between high school and college. In high school, you've got a very highly structured day. There are lower levels of independent learning for the most part. So what I mean by that is typically students learn material in class and then they come home and they do homework or research or some reading that reinforces the concepts that they learned in class. Sometimes it's a little bit different when you have AP classes or IB classes, or if you're taking a dual enrollment class, there are some higher levels of independent learning. But for the most part, in high school, not a whole lot of independent learning. You also have very little control over the courses you take. Your school district outlines what the requirements are to get a high school diploma. They have told you what the sequence is for math, pretty much. You have a little bit of flexibility in terms of electives and, whether you take an honors class, but for the most part, it's all laid out for you. Parents are very involved at the high school level. In fact, many school systems have their online portal set up so that parents can have their own accounts and can, whenever they want, go in and look at students' grades. Oftentimes, if there's a problem in the classroom, teachers are emailing parents directly or calling parents directly. And parents are calling administrators, teachers, counselors directly to talk about their children. If your child has an IEP and to a little bit of a lesser extent, a 504 plan, the law that governs K through 12 education is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA. And one of the key components of the IDEA is an acronym called FAPE, which stands for, doesn't exactly stand for, but it refers to the concept of free and appropriate education. What that means is that the law requires your school to make any modifications, adaptations, so that your child can learn along with their peers. And there's no cost to you for those modifications. If your child requires a special school, the school district is supposed to provide that. So if your child needs assistive technology, the school is going to provide that for you. That's high school. So now let's contrast that with college. In college, if you can remember, for me, it was a million years ago, but if you can remember, you only spend a few hours of each day in class when you're in college. You might have 2 classes on a given day, each one for an hour and a half, as opposed to the 8 hours of structured time that your child is spending in high school now. So there's a lot more time to figure out what to do with, including when you're going to get your work done, and when you're going to take care of all of those life chores if you are living away from home for college, laundry and groceries and cleaning and all of that stuff. There's a lot of independent learning that happens in college. For the most part, in college classes, your child is going to be learning the material outside of the class time, reading a chapter, watching videos, whatever the content is. And then class time is used to help digest that information, to take it to the next level, to discuss. So students are required, expected to understand the concepts before they actually get to class. Requirements in college can be very flexible. So almost every college, every four-year college at this point has what we call general education requirements. So those are areas of study that a student has to complete as part of their college experience. However, within each of those areas of study, let's say, for example, social science, right? Well, social science can mean a million different things. And your child gets to choose how they fulfill those requirements. There is some guidance. Students have to seek out that guidance, but it's ultimately the student's responsibility to select their courses and to register for their courses. And if there's a problem, if they get closed out of a class, or if they sign up for a class but don't have the prerequisite class that they needed to take, those are issues that they need to work out on their own with the staff at the college. There's no direct parent involvement in most college situations. And that's because once your child leaves K through 12 education, 9 times out of 10, they're over 18 at that point anyway, they're an adult. And so the privacy laws come into play. Colleges will not talk with parents about most issues unless they have permission from the child in writing to talk with a parent. And even then, most schools are trying to help your young adult foster independence and bring them into adulthood. So even if they have permission to talk to parents, A lot of schools really don't want to do that. They'll, if your child gives permission for you to talk to the director of residential life about a housing issue that your child is having on campus, the director of residential life will most likely say, we should not be having this conversation without your child involved, or please have your child come to my office and make an appointment. And then while they're here, we will call you. So there's a lot less direct parent involvement. And finally, the law that governs education once students leave K through 12, and I'm talking mainly about special education law, is the Americans with Disabilities Act. The metric for the Americans with Disabilities Act is very different than the metric for the IDEA. And the way that that will impact your child the most is, number one, students must get into college on their own merit. There are no alternative paths for college admissions. Now, for most of the students who are considering college, getting into college is not really the biggest barrier because they've had a tremendous amount of support in high school and they're college capable. So, for example, they might have great grades because they're getting a lot of accommodations, and they might have fantastic SAT scores, and they might have received a lot of support and help with college applications and essays. So they've made it into college, but once they're in college, the metric for accommodations at the college level is that they need to be reasonable, and that includes cost, right? So there are certain accommodations that, like extended time, that are easy, right? But then, for example, if your child needs significant assistive technology, the school may not be willing to provide that for you. They don't have an obligation to provide most of that for you. That will be on you. The other thing is that with the ADA, professors will not modify the curriculum to meet your child's needs. So one accommodation that I hear about frequently at the high school level is, if a math homework is 20 problems, a child might have an accommodation where they're only required to do 10 of those problems. Well, that's not going to happen at the college level. If the assignment is 20 problems, the student is expected to complete 20 problems and submit 20 problems. So the difference in the law can be a little shocking if you're not ready for it. And that's where the concept of college readiness really comes into play. It's being able to survive and thrive in this new environment that has a whole different set of parameters. So here are the 6 areas of college readiness that I think are critical. So I'm going to introduce them to you, and then we're going to talk about them one by one, and I'll provide some more information. So we've got self-advocacy, executive function, life skills, which can include taxes, by the way, but I'm not going to talk about taxes. Social communication, self-awareness, and emotional regulation. So it's skill building in these 6 areas that I think are really critical to college success for anybody, but most especially for students on the autism spectrum. So what? So college and high school are different. College readiness is important. Why? Think back to the topic of this talk. We all want our kids to be 3 things. We want them to be confident. Okay. We want them to know that they can handle situations and they can meet challenges. We want them to be resilient. Okay. This is a huge one, right? We want them to know that if they get knocked down, they can get back up again. And those two things make it much easier for our kids to be independent, which is what we all want for them, right? We want them to have their own opinions, to make their own decisions, and to own those decisions, right? So working on those areas of college readiness, whoops, let me go back one slide. Working on those areas of college readiness will help our children build the confidence and resilience and independence that we want them to have. It also will help us to know that our kids can be resilient. Okay, that when my children left for college, that was the thing that scared me the most, is what's going to happen if they fail. We don't like for our kids to fail. Nobody likes to fail, right? But experiencing some level of failure is sometimes important to know that you can regroup and you can move on. So the reason why working on these college readiness skills is so critical is because it helps usher our kids into adulthood by helping them build confidence, resilience, and independence. So now let's work through each of those 6 areas of college readiness. The first one is self-advocacy. So self-advocacy is what it says it is. It's being able to advocate for yourself. That's it. But a lot of our kids are not doing that yet because as parents, we're used to doing the heavy lifting. When the kids are really little and they can't advocate for themselves, we do it for them. What we have to do is work with them to shift the responsibility for self-advocacy to them so that they can do it when they get to college. Because, when they get to college and they are bumping up against a class that's full, or they don't understand the material that they're reading in the class, they need to be able to speak up and say, I need help. And that's not always so easy. So how can you work with your young adults now while they're still in your nest, and you can keep a closer eye on them and you can help to pick them up when they fall? How can you work with them on building their self-advocacy skills? The most important thing is that they need to understand their diagnoses. For those of us like myself whose kids were diagnosed very young, they were really too young to talk about it. And so we didn't really. But ultimately, they've got to understand their constellation of challenges. They've got to understand what their accommodations are and why they have those accommodations, how that helps them. That's a keystone, that's a cornerstone of whatever you want to call it, of laying the foundation for self-advocacy. Another type of self-advocacy that we should be working with our kids on is scheduling their own appointments, right? So, and filling their own medication, refilling their own medication. A lot of our kids take medication for attention issues or anxiety, or, some of those things are controlled substances that you can't get 3 months supply, and you have to remember to call and ask for a new prescription. So working with your child on scheduling their own appointments and calling for their own prescription refills is a way to help them build self-advocacy. Having them communicate directly with teachers is another one. So if your child comes home and says, my history teacher is, she's terrible, she doesn't understand me. Instead of sitting down and firing off an email and asking for a meeting, work with your child to draft that email and have your child send the email from their email account. That's a way to begin working on that aspect of self-advocacy. And finally, with the IDEA, I believe in most states, if not all states, by the time a child is 14, they should be participating in their IEP meetings. But you can actually start earlier than that, not by necessarily having them come to meetings, but talking to them about it. We have a meeting coming up to set new goals for the school year. How are things working for you? Is there anything in particular you would like to work on? Once they're of age where they can participate in the meetings, helping them to have an active role in those meetings and letting their voice be heard, that can go a long way to building self-advocacy. So now we have executive function. Everybody has heard of this term. I don't have the chart here, but executive function is an umbrella term that really encompasses lots and lots of different skills. When we think of executive function, we think of it mainly in terms of time management and organization. Where this comes into play at school is knowing when your assignments are due, knowing what the requirements are for each assignment, turning those assignments in. I can't tell you how often I hear from parents, my child does their homework and then they forget to submit it, or there's some complicated process that they have to go through to submit it online and they just can't master it. Okay, those are things they're going to need to be able to do when they're in college. And it can be complicated. So working with them to figure that stuff out, right? How do I actually turn in my assignments? How much time do I need to leave to do this project? I have a term paper due, it's September. I have a term paper due in January. Helping your child figure out how to chunk that assignment. In high school, a lot of times the teachers are doing that work for the students. There's a big paper due. They may say, okay, first we want your thesis statement. Then the following month, we want a list of references. And then the following month, we want an outline. And then the following month, we want your first draft. Okay. There may be some professors in college, especially for freshmen, who may do that kind of thing, but it's not a given. So your child needs to have experience doing that kind of stuff on their own. Executive function also comes into play with other aspects of life. We talked about filling prescriptions, right? Remembering that your 30-day supply of Vyvanse only has 2 days left, and now it's time for you to call the psychiatrist's office and have them send in a new prescription. So all of these kinds of things fall under executive function. One of the best ways that I like to start shifting the locus of control for executive function to students is the idea of a weekly planning meeting. What I mean by that is your family sits down at the table at a regular time every week. Maybe that's Friday afternoon once everybody's home. Maybe that's Sunday evening, whatever works for your schedule. And you ask your child, okay, what do you have coming up this week? And let them log on to Canvas or Schoolology or whatever platform they're using and show you that they know how to access each of their classes, or they have a one-page printed syllabus that they were given at the beginning of the year. Let them show you and tell you about the things that they have done, that they need to get done, and then ask them what their plan is. What's your plan for getting that you have that test on Wednesday? What's your plan for being ready for that test? Hear what they have to say. And then you can ask them some questions. Are you sure there's going to be enough time to do that? Because don't you also have a doctor's appointment on Tuesday? But give them more control and let them learn how to do that. Also, the idea of setting boundaries, right? We talked about the fact that in school, a lot of times, late work, just turn it in whenever you get it in. I know for a while, um, my school district had this policy that a student could never get lower than a 50%, unless they didn't turn something in at all. Well, the school system may have those rules, but you don't have to have those rules at home. So executive function with life skills, right? Don't bail them out if they forget their lunch. Um, Try and come up with a plan that's going to work for you so that there are some consequences for them missing deadlines. And again, remember, the idea is to do all this work with our kids in a safe environment where we can still help them out and we're not going to leave them flailing around, right? But we want them to learn how to do these things for themselves. The concept of working backward is a great way to work on the executive function skills relating to chunking large assignments. What I mean by working backwards is you start with when the project is due, and then you say, okay, well, if it's going to be turned in, if you have to turn in a final paper on Friday, then by when should you have your first draft? And how much time do you think it will take you to get there? So if it's going to take you 3 days to write your first draft, by when do you have to have your research completed? So that's what we mean by working backward. And that ties nicely in with the last item I have here, which is practicing estimating time. A lot of our kids are time blind. They have no idea how long it takes to do certain things. And they need to learn, because when they're in college, that's going to really be mainly on them. So when you're having your weekly planning meetings and when you're working backward with your kids, ask them, how long do you think it will take you to do this? Have them keep track, right? You thought this was going to take you 3 hours. How long did it actually take you? And then you can use that information for the next time you have to figure out when to start something so that it's finished on time. So these are some ways that you can start working with your young adults on executive function, mainly pertaining to academics, but also for those life activities that we're going to be giving them more responsibility for. And now we have life skills, right? So life skills is a lot of different things. Managing money is an important life skill. Doing your own laundry, making sure that you have, in my house, the straw that broke the camel's back when I basically said to my kids, okay, now you're responsible for your own laundry, is when they started needing certain articles of clothing for certain days. Today is school spirit day. I need my t-shirt. How come it's not clean? Well, you never told me you needed it, right? So it was those kinds of things where I just said, okay, now you're responsible for doing your own laundry. And that's where you can also bring in the executive function component of laundry. If I need my shirt clean for Friday, I've got to make sure that I've got my laundry done and it's dry, and my shirt's not in a ball underneath my bed by Thursday night. Also, nutrition, I consider to be a life skill. When your kids go to college, they're going to have lots of options available to them for food and beverages. And so you want to help them to understand what a balanced diet looks like when they're making choices for themselves. I mean, you put a balanced meal in front of them at night, but they may not really understand what makes that a balanced meal. Making sure to stay hydrated. All of these things are life skills. So how do you work on those? Household chores, like I talked about, laundry, giving them some responsibility in the home, and then they then have the consequence of that thing is not completed. What a great way to work on money management. The holidays are coming up. Give them some gift cards. Give them $100 Visa card and tell them, okay, you're responsible for purchasing your outfit for that dance or, whatever it is. But helping them to understand that money doesn't grow on trees is basically what that one's all about. This is can be a controversial one, learning to drive. Okay. I know a lot of young adults who don't know how to drive. It may not be a big deal when they're in high school or even when they're in college, if they go someplace where there's a good bus system. However, when they are looking for a job, um, looking for a place to live, not being able to drive unless you live in the heart of a city with a wonderful transportation system is really going to be a problem. The younger they are, the easier it is for them to do it, the longer they can take to get it done. So when I work with families, I love to make it a goal to get the driver's license before leaving for college. And then making sure that your child practices their driving when they come home from school. If you're not sure if your child can drive, if they have a medical condition, if, whatever it is, there are vocational rehabilitation programs in every state that will evaluate whether or not your child is capable of learning to drive. I put self-care on here. There, I'm not talking about it in this webinar, but there's a whole concept of neural health about the things that you need to do to take care of yourself so that you can be calm and have your stress level um, not get too high on a regular basis. And that's what I'm talking about here with self-care. So whatever that looks like for your student, it could be, eating a balanced diet, getting exercise, um, personal hygiene can fall in this category. If you're constantly reminding your child to shower, that may be a conversation that you may want to have because you're just not going to be there in the same way when they're at college. Social communication, what I'm talking about here is really two things. There is verbal communication, and it's different ways, the ways that you communicate with the different people that you're going to be interacting with. So the way you talk to a friend is not the same way you would necessarily talk to a professor or a school administrator. And also the setting in which you're having these conversations is going to change the way you talk with some of these folks. If you're going to meet with a professor about a test that you didn't do well on, that conversation is going to sound very different than if you and that professor are at a welcome reception for a speaker that department brought in. So understanding the differences is important. And then the other piece of this is actually there's three things. The second piece is the nonverbal stuff, right? Which we know our kiddos really struggle with a lot. And so helping them to better understand what some of those nonverbal cues mean can be really important. The third piece is the whole idea of navigating and building friendships. Again, this could be a topic for a whole nother webinar. When our kids are in high school, a lot of times they've been with the same group of kids doing the same activities since they were in elementary school. There's a certain level of familiarity there. They feel comfortable saying hello to them. They may be getting invited to social events, birthday parties and things like that, where a whole group is included. Um, but your child may not actually know how to make a new friend. And that's something that they're going to be faced with in college. We talked about all of that extra time that our kids have during their school day, during the day when they're in college. And chances are they'll have a roommate, right? So they need to learn how to find good sources of friends, develop those social relationships so that they're not lonely. Being lonely can be a huge source of stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety reduce the ability to execute your executive functions, to concentrate, all of those kinds of things. So we want to try and help our kids really understand how to do this and give them some practice while they're still with us in before they leave for college. So how can you do that? I talked about friendship building. There are some programs that your children can participate in. Peers, social skills is something that I'm trained in. And there are programs that are built around peers all over. And there's peers for adults as well. Some children benefit from a program like that. In other cases, it's really more about having some conversations with your kids, talking about where to find good sources of friends. And I'll give you a hint. It's people that you have something in common with. So if your child likes musical theater, joining the musical theater program at school and working on some small goals of, introducing yourself to one of your classmates, asking them to, do something outside of school. Those kinds of things are things that you can work on with your kids, and also modeling and talking to them about what you do in certain situations, so that they understand what that looks like. That can be really helpful. Helping them to pick and giving them more say in the extracurricular activities that they participate in can make sure that they're doing things that they actually have an interest in. I know sometimes as parents, we want to see our kids reach a certain milestone in an activity. For me, it was my kids all did Taekwondo, and I really, really, really wanted them to stick with it until they got their black belts. Um, and honestly, for two of my three kids, I kind of made them stick with it longer than they really should have. And that made it difficult for them to participate in other things that they had more of an interest in. So having conversations about extracurriculars can be part of working on social communication. Finding a volunteer opportunity is a sometimes overlooked source of working on a lot of these different skills. One of my kids volunteered and still does volunteer at the local animal shelter. So being in a situation where you need to talk to new people, not all the time, but sometimes, can help build social communication skills. And again, talking about those nonverbal social cues. Sometimes a good way to talk about social communication, really a lot of these things, is I can't think of a better term for it. I call it a postmortem. Okay. So you have a situation that maybe went really well, maybe didn't go very well, but talking about it afterwards when everybody's calm and talking about what went right in that situation. What would you maybe have done differently next time? I noticed that you were standing really close to the other person. Did you, but they had a weird look on their face, do you know what that means? Just that kind of stuff. So looking at a situation after the fact and finding things that maybe could become goals for improvement can be really helpful. The last two areas of college readiness are self-awareness, this one, and then the next one is emotional regulation. And they're really two sides of the same coin. Self-awareness is understanding what your feelings and emotions feel like in your body, the thoughts that pop into your head, for example, when you're starting to feel anxious about something. Do you sweat when you're nervous? Do you get butterflies in your stomach when you're excited? Just recognizing what those cues are that can help you understand what you're feeling and experiencing. This is really important because if we're not aware, then it's really hard to regulate, which is the next thing, emotional regulation. So how do you work on self-awareness? I mean, it's not always so easy. But again, going back to understanding diagnoses, that may help your child better understand situations that are difficult for them. You may have heard the concept masking, right? The idea of autistic masking, trying to fit in. That can take a real toll on mental health, on energy level. So understanding when you mask, that could be helpful as well. Again, understanding accommodations your child understanding the accommodations that they receive and why those accommodations are helpful to them. That can be part of self-awareness. Recognizing how they respond to stress is really important because the way to regulate those stress responses depends on what your response is. If you get into like a feedback loop of, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy, that you may deal with that differently than if you, start to feel physical sensations in your body. And then I've got motivation down here because different people are motivated by different things. And understanding what motivates you can be really, really helpful in helping someone figure out how to push through something that maybe they're not so excited about, right? I talked at the beginning about general education requirements. We all know that people do better, are more willing to stick with things, are more interested in things that they enjoy. Well, chances are your child's going to have to take some classes that they don't enjoy. So if they have an understanding of the things that motivate them, then they can turn to those motivators to help them get through difficult things. If they're motivated by competition, find a classmate and say, how fast can you, well, that's not a good example. I was going to say, how fast can you finish this homework? But the speed is probably not what you're after there. But, if your child has a goal of going to a club meeting to meet some new people, figuring out a way to motivate them to do that, after you go to that meeting, why don't you take yourself out and get some ice cream or, whatever it is. But working on understanding what motivates you can be really helpful. And then emotional regulation. Emotional regulation, is knowing and understanding yourself well enough to be able to pull out those tools and strategies that help you when you're starting to, have a meltdown or you're just really not in a good place. So how do you work on that? How do you help your child work on these things when they're still at home? I'm going to talk about the second item on this list first. Journaling can be really great way to collect the data that you need in order to start working on these things. So it doesn't have to be 3-page entry every single night. It could just be jotting down a couple of words that describe how the day went and how you were feeling so that you can learn to start connecting. Oh, when I have a really stressful day, I feel really tired. And when I feel really tired, here is how I can help myself. And that will help reduce stress. Communication, what I mean by that is, again, more of just talking with your child, that whole idea of a postmortem. I noticed you got really upset in that situation. What did it feel like? Why were you upset? Do you know why you were upset? Is there anything that you could have done to help yourself not be so upset? Investigating stress reduction strategies is very easy to do. I mean, if you just go onto Google and you type in stress reduction strategies, there are a bazillion of them. Breathing techniques are a form of stress reduction strategy. Preferred activities, spending a little time doing something that you really enjoy. Spending a half an hour watching an episode of whatever you're binging at the moment can be a stress reduction strategy. Some people are very tactile, so having something soft or something that they can keep in their pocket, or just to touch when they feel like their stress is getting higher. Those kinds of things are what I'm talking about. This is a great time as you're working with your child to build these college readiness skills, to also incorporate an investigation of stress reduction strategies that work for them, so that by the time they get to college, if they call you and they're upset, you can say to them, okay, I want you to take a minute and do that thing, take 3 deep breaths, whatever, a drink of water, whatever it is that and they know will work for them most of the time. Counseling is on this list because the whole concept of self-awareness and emotional regulation can be really difficult and tricky, and can bring up some really big feelings. And it can be really helpful to have a trained mental health professional that you're connected with, who can help you and your child work through this stuff. Emotional regulation is not easy, and we don't all do it well, and we don't all do it well all the time, even if we know the strategies and techniques that we can use. So now that I've shared all of this information with you, now what do you do with it all? Let me remind you that the reason we're working on these things is because we want to build confidence and resilience so that our kids can be independent. We want our kids to know that our kids to be confident. We want them to know that they're resilient. We want to have the confidence to know that they can be resilient. And the end result is that they will go into adulthood and into college with a confidence and a level of independence that will help them have a full college experience and be successful at their endeavor that they've worked so hard to achieve. So you're all, for the most part, parents of high school students. How do you start doing this? Okay, well, so first of all, the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be. A lot of times, to learn new skills, to form new habits, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, can take a long time. And for some of these things, the on-ramp is even longer for our kids. So the sooner you start, the more time you give yourself to make mistakes. A lot of this is trial and error, and to find the things that work. What's really also important is to talk to the other people on your child's team, your co-parent, the folks at school who work with your young adult on a regular basis. any outside sources, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, a mental health counselor, whoever it is that your child is working with, you want to talk with them and your child to talk about how do you prioritize these things? What are the areas where should we start? What's our plan, right? And then you can use that information to build into the formal ways that you work on these things at school, the IEP, right? So when you're at the IEP meeting with your child, you can talk about, this year we want to work on self-advocacy. And so we'd like to set some goals around self-advocacy and then set up a plan with the team for how they're going to support your young adult as they develop these self-advocacy skills. Another thing that's really important to do is you've got to learn. As parents, you have to learn how to shift your communication style. You're going to want more information about the difference between the IDEA and the ADA. You're going to want support and help. So in my practice, I work primarily with young adults, helping them to work on goal setting and achieving goals. But in this case, it's really important for you parents to have a lot of good foundational information. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I do that, right? If I'm working with young adults and I'm trying to get information to parents, how am I going to do this? So what I did was I actually created a course. It's called College 101. And it goes into a lot more depth in the 6 areas of college readiness. And then there's more stuff on the front end and on the back end. I think it's a wonderful course, if I do say so myself. For your participation in this webinar tonight, and those of you who are going to be watching this with the recording, I do have a discount code for you, fall webinar. So you can get $50 off the course with that code. And this is just a good way for you to, at your own pace, dive into more detail into what I've been talking about tonight. Okay, I think we are ready for Q&A. Laura,
Hi, I'm gonna jump in now, if that's okay.
yes, can I put one final slide up on the screen?
Absolutely. Let me do make you the host again.
Okay. Am I sharing or
You're
not?
sharing.
I am sharing. Okay.
Well, I don't
So,
see it. Do you have
oh,
it
let
on your
me,
screen?
okay, let me, uh, can you see it now?
No.
Okay. Let me go back to this one and I think I have to share my screen again. Okay. All right. So, this is just final slide. While we're doing Q&A, my information, this QR code, if you hold up your phone, we all know how to do this at this point, I think, that will take you to my website, to actually the landing page for my course. So it can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay. I
Well, I
can't
have some
see you,
questions for you
Laura.
first, Beth.
Yep, yep, yep.
Let me just jump in
Hmm.
and do my own little spin on this issue. Um, the statistics speak for themselves. For only 40% of students who start finish in 4 years. That's all students. That's nationwide, neurodiverse, typical. College is tough. It's just different from high school. And our kids sometimes, they need, either they should, we have to think about these issues before they go to college, or we're going to be dealing with it when they're in college. Beth had said that it's really important for our guys to know how to ask for help. And again, this is not just true for neurodiverse kids. All kids need to learn how to ask for help when they're in college. One thing that I think is it being increasingly important, but it's controversial, is I actually think that our guys have to, and gals, our kiddos, need to be able to say, uh, dear, Professor Smith, I have autism. I understand material better when I read it than when I hear it. For example, all of our kids are different in different ways, but being able to identify your disability
Yep.
and actually tell an adult, be it a professor or a school administrator or even, a prospective employer, I think that it gets you places now
Absolutely.
more than it did like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, everybody's worried about stigma. I think we're in a new place right now. And I'm teaching my son to say, hi, I'm Ian and I have autism, and that means I'm good at computers, but I'm have trouble writing essays, for example.
Yep. And actually, Laura, this can be really a great strategy with the social communication piece as well. Some of the clients that I work with have slow processing speed. And so sometimes they hear something and they need to kind of take an extra beat to digest it before they respond. And that pattern can oftentimes, people are like, why aren't you answering my question? Or, whatever it is. So if a young adult can say, I have autism, I'm on the spectrum, I just want to let you know, it may take me a minute to answer your question, or I might ask you to repeat the question so that I can make sure I understand it before I answer it. That's a form of self-advocacy too.
It is a form of self-advocacy, and it's so important that the biggest rush in getting diagnosis now is not in 3-year-olds, but it's in the adults who need
Mhm.
that diagnosis to get some accommodations in their workplace or just understand how they work. So understanding neurodiversity, whether it's autism or the other side of the coin of ADD, is really, really a new skill that I think all of our kids need. I saw a college administrator giving a webinar, I think last spring, and he said that he didn't think that most kids, typical or not typical, were college ready right out the door. That they get to college and they have to learn, maybe for the first time how to do laundry. They just have to figure it out then and there. Um, and so my oldest son, who may be a little ADD, but is certainly not autistic, he had a rough first semester learning a lot of these skills. We just threw him in college and he had to figure it out. Now, it would have been easier for him for sure if he had mastered these skills before he went there. Um, but for some kids, they have to actually be in that setting in order to learn it. One of my recommendations for any parent is to make that first semester the easy semester. Do
Yep.
not sign them up for physics, chemistry, calculus, and biology that first semester. You start off, with rocks for jocks and other equivalent easy classes. Do you think
Yeah.
that's a good idea, Beth?
Yeah, it can be a good idea. There are some schools who actually will only allow freshmen, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. Their policy is you only take 4 classes your first semester, as opposed to the traditional 5.
Right.
And there are some schools where a reduced course load can actually be an accommodation. That's a tricky accommodation, and there are some consequences. There can be some consequences financially. So it's something to investigate with individual schools. But there is absolutely a recognition that you should. There are going to be a lot of stressors. So don't make your academics a very big stressor if you can avoid it.
Um, a lot of what your recommendations, which were all great, spot
Thank
on,
you.
super awesome. They were assignments for the parents.
Hmm.
Do you feel like schools could be helping out, or is there a therapist, or are there other coaches? I mean, clearly we can always call Beth herself to get help, but in the community, where can parents go to get some of this help?
So I think that your first line of defense should be the school, the support team you already have, right? So whether that's the school staff, through IEP goals, Laura, you and I started talking a little bit before this about transition goals, right? So talking about what the ultimate goals are for the young adult when they're going to leave school. My child's going to go to college. I want them to have, they need to have these skills. Let's build this stuff into the IEP. Some of it, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but some of it is about fading supports so that your child can really step up to the plate on those in those areas where they're not going to be able to have that as an accommodation at college. Also, the if your child is already working with a therapist, if you're going to be doing this kind of work, please let the therapist know because these are stressors, right? And that can have an impact on emotional stability. So you want to let everybody on your team know what the plan is, and everybody should be on board with the plan.
Right.
In terms of other community resources, there are some, actually, I have a resource section on my website where that lists a lot of them. But if you're looking to, for example, maybe get more information about autism or how to talk about autism, there's an organization called AANE, which they've changed their name a few times. I think now it's the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity. So AAN for neurodiversity and then E. AANE.org has some amazing resources. There's also a website called Think College, which has some great resources on it in terms of things to consider when you're thinking about college. Um, there are parent resource centers, I think, at in every community school system. And they also have some good resources as well. And all of these things are free. So, free
Okay.
is always good.
Free is always good. Absolutely. So Nicole wants to know, what impact does a 504 or IEP have in college? It seems like depends on how reasonable the accommodations are. Well, there are no like IEPs in college. It just
Right.
doesn't exist.
It
And the
doesn't transfer.
504 plans that you've seen in high school, they also don't exist.
Right.
The college
So,
might actually ask to see those documents to get so that you can get um, entrance into getting their disability services, but you're not going to see the plan at
right,
all when you
right.
to college.
And um, so a little tiny little bit of history. So 1.5 million years ago, every college wanted you to have a psychoeducational evaluation that was no older than 3 years old before they would talk about providing accommodations for your child. That's very expensive, especially if you're like me and you did the initial evaluation when your child was very small. Um, so now schools will accept alternative documentation, including copies of IEPs or a letter from a health professional that outlines what the
You can also have
diagnoses
your high
are.
school do that test for you too.
You can. Different school districts work differently. I know, for example, in my school district, the waiting lists are typically pretty long for that kind of stuff. But the point being
Thank
that an
you.
IEP will not guarantee you accommodations, but it could serve as your um, your proof, like you said, your sort of entry ticket to working with the Disability Services Office.
Right. My child is in private school. How how often should IEP meetings happen? And Ariana wants to know, typically in public schools, IEP meetings happen every year.
Yeah.
Typically, you can have them more often, but both, whether you're in a private school or a public school, you should be incorporating the social emotional skills. All of this should be a component of of the child's educational plan.
Right. And actually private schools, I don't think they even call them IEPs. They call them different things. So my advice is if your child's in a private school and they're already receiving some learning support, talk to the learning support specialists and they can talk to you more about what the procedures are at that particular school.
Sue Kim wants to know, how do you talk to your child about their diagnosis? How do you tell them you have autism?
That's a great question. Um, every every family is different, right? So you know your child best. My suggestion is to educate yourself as a parent, maybe join a support group, look at some of the resources on AANE. There are some great books. Again, on my website, I have some reading lists that can help with you understanding the diagnosis and then sharing it with your child. I will give you a piece of information. Your child knows they're different. Okay. They may just not understand exactly in what way. And having that information can actually be a huge relief. So you can talk about it the same way you would talk about any kind of physical health situation or like somebody who needs glasses, right? Your vision is not, you can't see certain things without glasses. So we got you glasses so that you can see the blackboard. You have allergies. We had you tested. We found out what your allergies were, and now you take allergy shots or medication. And this is just like that. Everybody's got their own stuff. Nobody is built
Yeah.
exactly the same way as somebody else.
Like I
In
said, I
your
think there's
case,
been big differences even in the past 5 years. People are more open about differences, which is awesome.
yes, yes. And
Um,
there are some fantastic books out there that you
yeah.
can you can read with your young adult. There's a great one called What I Mean When I Say I'm Autistic. It was written by a young woman in her late 20s, early 30s, uh, who got a very late diagnosis and sort of what the things were that were challenging for her and how getting the autism diagnosis kind of made sense to her. So it's a very individual thing, but it's just really important for them to understand.
We have three parents who are all struggling with communicating with their students that, especially, I mean, again, it's not just being autistic, it's just teenagers in
Yeah.
general. they're they're a pain in the ass, right? They don't want to chat. How do we help them develop these essential skills when they're just like, Mom, go away?
Right. So this is something that there aren't even enough hours in the day to talk about all this stuff in one day. But um, part of this is learning how to shift your communication style with your kids. When our kids are little, we have what I like to call a managerial parenting style sometimes. We schedule all the appointments, we determine who they're going to be friends with, we tell them when to brush their teeth and when to go to bed and all that kind of stuff. And that's as it should be. When you have a child who has learning differences, who requires maybe a little bit more, a little extra, we that managerial parenting role is pretty deeply ingrained. What you need to learn how to do is shift to an advisory parenting role. where you take a more of a back seat and you instead of giving your child, interrogating your child about their day, you take a different approach. There's an amazing book called, I'm going to look at my shelf because I can never remember the full title, but it is called What Do You Say? And the print on the subtitle is too small, so I can't read it. But it's the authors are William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. And it's a fabulous book on making that shift in your parenting style so that you can better communicate with your kids as they're trying to become independent. I mean, because that's really what it's all about. And also, I want to acknowledge that, now there's PDA, which is something that I don't know if when I was growing up, it was public displays of affection, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's pathological demand avoidance is what has been called for a long time, and now they're trying to shift the language to make it a little less negative. But if your child has that profile, I would get some help. That is an anxiety response, and it's not easy to work with. I have a child with that profile, and it can be tricky. So professional help is a good thing. And I'm talking really about mental health counseling in for this.
Okay, one last question from Katie, because we are overboard here for time. But Katie wants to know, how do you approach talking about a major or academic plan if they're not focused, but set on a certain idea of what college should be? Or if they have a college in mind, but might not be a fit, or at least be ready, or it would be really difficult. How do you do this real talk with your student?
Yeah. So I would say that honesty is really, really important. If your child has a career goal, I want to be a professional singer, and that that's just not really going to be an option. Do some investigating with them, right? There are some career assessments that are appropriate for high school students. Not to say, okay, when you grow up, you should be, an airline pilot or whatever it is, but just to help them figure out where their interests lie, what they're good at, what their challenges might be, and how that all fits together to uh, help them find career paths that would be a good fit. And then you do that working backward thing, right? If they really don't know what they want to do, then talk about schools where they can get a little taste of everything, so that they can narrow down their options. Um, Doing some research, there are some fantastic websites out there that actually the federal government produces, that have wonderful information about careers, but also talk about what's important in choosing a college. Um, if they have an interest in a particular area that's unusual, you might look for colleges that have that and other stuff. So if they say, I want to go into game design, you know, it might not be a good idea to look at schools that only have game design as their main focus and don't offer other things. Um, it's a long conversation, but talking about what the purpose of college is, and what the expectations are on the other side can be really helpful. The other thing I want to say, and I know we're over time, if your child, one thing that can happen when your child goes to college is that they may have to devote a humongous portion of their energy, um, mental energy and physical energy, to their academics. And that's not going to leave them a lot of time to explore certain careers, to look at internship opportunities, to do job screening, to go to talks that are offered on campus. So the better prepared they are to be at school and to have a balanced college life and participate in extracurriculars and do all that kind of stuff, the better position they're going to be to explore majors and careers and not just fall into something because it's something that they happen to be good at. That might not turn into a career. I don't know if that's really answering the question, but that's the best I can do right now.
Beth, thank you so much for your time. The questions, we still have amazing questions in the chat room. Um, but we're just gonna we've used up so much of your time. We're gonna have to log off. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to continue talking with Beth and other experts. We are going to have another talk in January on really delving into more of the differences between high school and college. We're having another specialist come to talk. Beth will come back and visit us again, and we will do a panel with Beth and a couple of others. I think in the spring, Beth and you and I need to talk about it. But
Sounds good.
uh, we want to have you back. The questions
Thank
keep
you.
coming, and so everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining the Autism College Connection. You are going to be automatically enrolled in our newsletter where I'll share more information about what I'm doing, what Beth is doing, and other experts. Beth will be reaching out with you with more information about her course. You can see her
Yes.
email address above there to reach out to her. You're
Hmm.
getting thanks so much in the comment section. Thank you from me too, Beth, and
Oh, you're so welcome.
it was great. It was great chatting.
It's
So
my
we'll do this again
pleasure.
soon.
Have a
Okay.
good night, everybody.
Take care. Good night.